It's time for my personal AFK Reroll Tierlist. Welcome back to Corky Gachas, and in this video, bring to you a reroll tier list because I do understand that some people are interested in rerolling for AFK Journey, and honestly the process isn't exactly the most tedious, right? It's quite fast, especially if you do multi-instances. Now before I go any further, right, just like to put on a disclaimer that this tier list, right, is not made with full power levels in mind. This is made for progression rerolling. So if you are rerolling for progression, this is going to be very beneficial for you. Of course, I'm also going to include some of the future values, but do not be alarmed if your favorite unit or the meta unit is actually in a lower tier, because they do not actually fit the tier list progression requirements that I have set for them. Now first up, we're going to have Lumon, and Lumon is an easy C tier because Lumon, honestly, compared to the other tanks, right, Lumon doesn't do that much. And also, I think Lumon falls into a bit of jack of all trades and also doesn't do damage, right? I think he is similar to like Temesia, except that Temesia does decent damage. So I think from that perspective, and comparing to the other alternatives like the Meta Torrent and also Brutus, right, with one copy wonder, right, you really don't want to have Lumon at all. So really don't want to reroll into him. Now moving on, next you're going to have Herwin, and for Herwin I'm going to put her in A tier. Honestly, she is a very strong healer. However, there is some context, right, because you're going to get between Rowan, Smokey as well as her within your first 30 pool. So assuming you did already get like Smokey or Rowan, then her value kind of drops because you probably want to use Smokey if you did get her, and if you get Rowan, Rowan is much better in the early game as well, and Herwin isn't really that useful when it comes to Dream Realm, and in the early game a lot of focus is about Dream Realm. Of course there is also the story, but if you already have Rowan, if you already have the Smokey, you're not going to want her as much, but she's still good as an overall unit to actually use for Wilders, but Wilder doesn't have the best faction units, right? Of course, you can pair her with Granny for the faction bonus, but outside of that, because there are so many meta tanks, right, you can go for Brutus, you can go for Torrent, and then you probably don't need Granny, and then she will be the odd one out from that perspective if you already have one of the two other supports. So this is why she's in A tier, not because she's bad, right? Don't get me wrong. Next one is going to be Torrent. Torrent is an easy S tier, and Torrent can function on one copy or on multiple copies. Of course, I think if you just have one copy, Brutus might be a bit better in certain scenarios due to the immortality. Regardless, right, Torrent having multiple lives and also increasing the damage that the boss receives for Dream Realm is going to make him really relevant and an S tier tank, right? Having 2 lives already S tier, but yeah, it's going to be really good, and you always want to put Torrent on your wish list, which means that even if you were to reroll into Torrent, you are likely going to get more copies. You're going to make him even stronger in the future. So Torrent definitely S tier. Next is going to be Rowan. I think Rowan is also easy S tier. Even if you were to already get Rowan on your 30th pool, right, and you get 2 copies of Rowan, I think that is going to be pretty beneficial. Rowan is going to be quite relevant until much later, and in the early game, right, you are going to be able to cast ultimate so much faster, especially for your Cecil. Casting the first ultimate faster is going to mean that you are going to win a lot of stages that you can't otherwise progress through for the story mode. So this is going to be quite relevant, and early game, Dream Realm, this is going to be good. Of course, late game, there are other meta units, but we're only talking about early game. Next is going to be Eagle, and Eagle, I'm going to put him in B tier, and the reason is similar to my reasoning for Herwin as well, right? It's not that Eagle is a bad unit, but Eagle is mainly for PvP, and he is much better if you are equal footing. And in the early game, right, you are going to want to push levels, and if you want to push levels, trying to use Eagle on one copy is not going to do you any good. He's going to just die. The tombstones, he's not going to create enough, and the battles don't last long enough for him to shine. So this is why he's going to be in B tier. Of course, a good unit in the later game. Next is going to be Vala. Vala, I'm going to put her in S tier. So Vala, there is 2 reasons why I put her in S tier. First one being that she is a good unit by herself. She switches her form, cuts the back line. This can be very useful, especially if they have a super tanky front line that you can't break through. You can use Vala, and also note that there is a rate up banner for Vala, so it's easier for you to utilize that one copy to turn it into something better, right? Since you need multiple copies to make the unit really shine, this is going to be quite beneficial. So good unit plus rate up banner first on global is going to really mean good things for Vala. Next is going to be Smoky Murky. This one is super meta, like Smoky Murky, even in the late game, basically the BIS. also have some circumstances whereby you want to use Reiner. Most of the time you're going to use Smoky Murky even for Dream Realm, except for that one boss that stops channeling, right? So basically what he does is he channels, he buffs the teammates, and the heal keeps going up constantly, right? AoE. So he's going to be very beneficial, especially since you want to score higher in Dream Realm. So healing plus offensive capabilities always mean a good character for Dream Realm, whereby the bosses score are in contention. Okay, so and you always keep him in your wish list, so really no brainer. Even if you were to get 2 duplicates, you're going to want him. Next is going to be Cecil. I think getting a Cecil duplicate, right, because you're always guaranteed a first copy, right? People will say, hey, since I already get 1 copy of Cecil, I can put her in a lower tier, I don't need to reroll for her. But the fact is, this game doesn't really thrive on 1 copy, right? This game units on 1 copy, they are really trash. You want to upgrade them. Of course, you can buy Cecil copies from the Arena store. However, getting 1 extra copy to work towards that 8 copies is going to be very good. Although, a lot of people say that Cecil falls off in the ultra late game. I think for early game progression, Cecil is ultimately king or queen. So you really want to have her copies in the early game. So getting duplicates not going to be bad. Next is going to be our Brutus, and Brutus I'm going to put him in S tier. In fact, high S tier. And Brutus is one of those units whereby once you use him, right, you'll feel very good, especially if you're pushing content that is higher power level than you because of his immortality. This means that no matter how much damage he receives, he can at least survive for that few seconds extra. So those few seconds extra means that you are able to charge up your ultimate as compared to Torrent. If you have him at low power levels and you're facing like huge discrepancy, once Torrent dies the first time and the enemy penetrates your backline, you're going to be screwed. So Brutus actually is really good, and once you get this 1 copy on the reroll, you don't have to put him on your wish list anymore, so you can go for other Mauler units that are pretty good, that are Smoky, Murky, as well as like the Shaquille. So these 2 units are the units that you want to put in your wish list. Next is going to be Thermesia. I'm going to put Thermesia in A tier. So like I mentioned, right, Thermesia is basically a better Lumon with damage, and she moves around a lot, and I think the reason why I'm going to put her also in A tier is because just even with 1 copy, you're probably going to do quite well in the Necro boss, whereby there's a lot of mobility required of your units. If you do not move, you're going to take huge amounts of damage. Hence, just even having her at 1 copy is going to be pretty decent for that. And Thermesia is one of those long-standing units that you always put in your Light Bearer's wish list, so getting 1 extra copy is going to always be useful, as opposed to units that you're not going to upgrade in the longer run. Next is going to be Shaquille. Shaquille, I'm going to put him in A tier, and the reason, once again, is not just because he's a good unit. I think Shaquille is always a long-standing unit that you want to put in your Mauler's wish list. However, the other reason is because of the fact that you always want to use Smoky Murky. So another Mauler unit that you can put on is going to be Shaquille, of course with like OD, right, that you're going to put, so it automatically forms a 3-man team. So this is going to be very relevant even if you want to put in like Brutus. Honestly, I think Shaquille forms more of like a sub DPS and more of like a sub tank as well. So I don't really think that these 2 units need to run together, but these 2 units combo really well. So I think Shaquille deserves an A rank, and in Dream Realm also quite relevant as well. Next is going to be Granny. I think in the face of other tanks, I still have to put Granny in A tier. Granny is overall just a very strong unit with healing as well as tanking capabilities. Of course, right, in the longer run, you're probably going to be using more of Torrent and Brutus. However, just by the fact that your first tempo is going to give you Cecil, your third tempo is going to give you one of the supports, right, you really need a tank unit. So if you happen to go into or get Granny and you don't want to reroll anymore for Torrent or Brutus, right, then feel free to stop on Granny. She's going to serve you well, especially if you're on a 30th pool, you got Herwin, so you can form that wilder connection, right, to form a faction bonus. So Granny is still relevant. Tanks are in general quite good on this reroll tier list, given the fact that you don't get it naturally. Next is going to be Cassidy. Cassidy, I'm going to put her in C tier. Cassidy is an ultra late game unit. You need her EX as well as you need her to be at Supreme to unlock her magic defense down, if I'm not wrong. So that is relevant in endgame Dream Realm, but in the early game, that 1 copy is not going to help you as much. So really not needed. Next is going to be Enron. Enron, I'm going to put him in B tier. Enron is more of a PvP unit, and also, although he is one of the units that you want to put on your wish list, he's not that good until he get more copies. So I really think that he falls a bit in the same tier as Eagle, whereby both of them are PvP units, and they do want more copies, want more investments before they can can really be strong. So in the early game, for reroll, not exactly as wanted. Although, like I mentioned, right, if you are rerolling for the longer run, he can be really worth it. Next is going to be Atlanta. Atlanta, overall, from what I can see, her review is that she's not a good unit at all, DPS front, and also keep in mind that she is like Barrier. And like Barriers, there is already a premier DPS in Merrily, although Merrily doesn't do that well in PvP, but in Dream Realm, which is what I consider the most important thing in the early game, especially for free-to-play players and beginners, right, you definitely don't want Atlanta over Merrily, so there's no need for her. You roll into her, also no use. Next is going to be Carolina, and Carolina, I'm going to put her in B tier. I'm quite tempted to put her in C tier, and the reason why I will say that she's quite C tier borderline, especially for reroll tier list, is that she really wants to work in the late game, and there is not enough slots for her in the early wish list. So early like wish list for the Graveborn, you want Cecilia, you want Torrent, you probably want Eagle next. You don't really want Carolina, and Carolina functions as a frostbite debuffer, damage dealer that does AoE, right? And she pairs really well with Enron in the end game teams, whereby Enron will suck everyone together and then Carolina will just AoE frostbite. So these two units are really late game, no place in reroll tier list, but of course I don't want to put her in C tier because I think she's a bit better than that. Last two we have Brian, and Brian, I'm going to put him in B tier, and honestly the reason why is because you already have a DPS unit in C tier, right, with your first 10 pulls, and also you are going to actively want to upgrade C tier. Meanwhile Brian, right, just getting one copy, sure, Brian isn't a bad unit and you can probably use him to progress in the storyline, but you already have Cecilia. I think it is much more useful to get a different unit such as a tank, or in other cases units that you want to put in your wish list for the longer run. For the wildest wish list, you probably want to put like Herwin plus like Enron, so there is no place to upgrade him. Of course, if you want to put him over Herwin, then potentially he might like move into like A tier because you are able to utilize more copies. But if you rerun to him and you're not going to use him, that I don't think it's going to be that useful, to be very honest. Lastly, we're going to have Rise, and for Rise, I'm going to put him in B tier. And the reason why he's in B tier is because mainly I think it's the wish list problem once again. As a DPS unit that likes to move around when he attacks, right, it's only going to be really relevant in the Necro Drake boss Dream Realm. So other than that, you can have better options. You already have a DPS unit, like I mentioned. DPS slots are very limited, and he's not even on the wish list. Shakir as well as Smokey is on the wish list instead. So of course you can replace like him with like Shakir, and then potentially, like I mentioned, is the Brian problem like that. You can move him into A tier, but from the meta teams that I've seen, right, Rise is not part of them at all. So just an overall meh unit. I think really doesn't deserve anything higher than a B on this reroll tier list. Now, if after watching this video you finally decided on who you want to reroll for, definitely check out this video where I touch on how you can reroll the fastest. I'll see you guys over there. This is Cocky Gachas, signing off.